the ideas of misogyny and patriarchy being not just restricted to men. It is how men, because they have controlled the narrative, the culture to a point that, sometimes it is being projected and executed through women. And it's a mindset as opposed to like just a construct restricted to a gender.
That's the award-winning Pakistani filmmaker, producer, writer, actor, and chef, Sarmad Khoosat, talking about Zindagi Tamasha, The Circus of Life, a film he produced and directed. It was Pakistan's submission to the Oscars, but it's never been seen in a single cinema in Pakistan because it was shut down by intolerance. My name is Shauna. Welcome to Her Kajal Won't Smudge. So I bet you're wondering what you're doing on a feminist podcast.
No, I'd love to be on a feminist podcast. I was only wondering that it does have a very catchy title. So I thought it's only about people who wear kajal. So I'm really excited.
I mean, we are a podcast where I talk to mostly women. I mean, today you're our very first male guest, so that's huge. I am really honored. The premise of the podcast is to talk to women who are challenging desi social norms with the power of creativity. So through their film, their music, activism, all of that. And, as I explore this topic, it becomes clear to me that it's not just women who are doing this. And I think that your work is such an incredible example of this that we thought, well, we're not a restrictive bunch. Let's reach out to him and see if he might be daring enough to join us. So I'm very grateful that you're here.
Thank you, Shana. I don't know. I feel truly honored. And to be honest, well, I don't, for one, believe in strict boundaries and lines like that. And I think it is a partnership. And when it comes to telling stories or making art, I do feel that women and their stories contribute so much to the world of literature and films and everywhere. So I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you. So I'd like to begin by asking you about what it was like for you growing up in Zia Haq's time.
We just grew up with this notion, which was made to look normal, that, uniforms and dictatorship, those were common images or ideas that just prevailed. On television, in the 9 o'clock news, every night you would hear about things, and the politics, one didn't quite understand. One just understood, oh, there is somebody in a uniform who runs the show, who runs the country. Until it was much later, because we were, of course, the direct affectees of the censorship when even, say, textbooks and school curriculum were heavily controlled and censored. When social studies became Pakistan studies only, and when whatever history we were being taught, and particularly the history of subcontinent, was extremely opinionated and censored. And to be honest, I did grow up in a bit of a bubble because I went to like a prep school of sorts, and one didn't really understand the actual effects of it until much later. That is when, your little ahas start accumulating, and then you are like, okay, so this is what I have been subjected to.
So tell me about your parents. What was it like in your household? Would you say that they were progressive in their thinking?
So you see, back in the day, and even when I was, say, growing up, and I'm talking about my university days, Pakistan is, broadly, and Punjab, a little bit more, is pretty like conservative, so to say. There are certain ideas and notions which are embedded deep into the fabric of just, everyday existence. Me being in the line of work that she was in, which was performing arts, she also did live TV and some theater. So that in itself, I think, was quite a statement. It wasn't really considered to be the right sort of profession for girls to join, And I remember Dadi, as much as I love her. Dadi was super conservative. Of course, she came from Delhi and she hadn't gone to school. So she had those ideas. And Amma was much older than Abba. So there was this always like, these murmurs of, oh, she worked on television and she was a radio person. And hence, this romance just, it was not a great idea to begin with. Da, 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 da. So regular things. But this is like a story that I grew up listening to. And Abba also was back then the second generation in, again, Abba acted in films, did theater regularly. And so, performing arts, one would like to believe it takes that kind of unnecessary edge away where, people are progressive.
Sarmad wrote, directed, and acted in a biopic about the author Manto. In this movie, which came out in 2015, Sarmad played Manto. I was curious why Manto means so much to him. I read that you came across the work of Manto and that was very transformative for you. Sadat Hassan Manto was a writer. It would be great if you told me a little bit about how you came across his work and what it did for you.
So I think that was one of my first big moments of illumination. Because you see, there was the version of partition of the subcontinent that was in the textbooks. And then there are stories which are like Toba Tek Singh and Kholdo and Thanda Gosht, where he essentially talks about the partition and gives a storyteller's point of view, which just hit somewhere that I wasn't ready for, It was much more real. It was much more believable. It was not facts and figures and just clinical information about chronology of events, etc. So I was very young again. This is around grade 8, so I must be about 12 or 13. Abba did have a bookshelf. So he had a very odd, eclectic assortment of books. So I found these little collections, small anthologies of Manto, not the entire works. So they look like small books. Then they look like, perhaps like Enid Blyton's or other things in Urdu that I had read. And I started reading it. Of course, I was introduced to colors of Urdu that I wasn't aware of. I was like, oh, there are Urdu words for things that we thought were only supposed to be in English or in languages that we don't know of. Just that accessibility was suddenly liberating, but frightening also. The first read was just like for the wrong reasons, just, enjoying descriptions because Manto is very descriptive. Until I would say past 2 or 3 stories, I read Kholdo and I was good at Urdu. Dadi was from Delhi, so we spoke Urdu at home, as Punjabis usually are not known for their Urdu, like in everyday sort of. But so we were quite good at Urdu. So I understood it. And I was like, this is not the partition that I know of. This is not the horror that, anybody has ever mentioned. And to be honest, Dadi did migrate from India. But she never had those epic, legendary stories or any sort of, remarkable stories to tell about. But she must have been really, really young. So I also did not have anybody say personal take on the migration business. So with this window into the world of these characters that just seemed too familiar, people that talked like us, people who lived in settings like us, and then Manto Saab talking about facets and situations, they jolted me, and I think I moved towards some kind of an adolescence mentally, I would say.
And his work also is really interesting because as I was researching for this episode with you, I started reading Manto for the first time in my life, actually. And I was really, really moved by the way he depicts the marginalized. His characters include prostitutes, child prostitutes, adult female prostitutes. And I wondered, what that would have been like for you because it's so different, I think, from mainstream literature.
So I think my transition was a bit abrupt. Again, going to a prep school of sorts, you are taught Daniel Defoe and, Robert Louis Stevenson. But other than that, I started reading other stuff. I got introduced to odd ones like Daphne du Maurier, and, like here and there, I would pick up some Bronte or some Thomas Hardy. But definitely, Manto, I would say the way he narrates his stories, it does not seem like that he's talking about margins or marginalized people, because he's really humanizing them and showing them in moments which are so relatable that that's not the first impression that one gets. I think that's only once you're done with it, that's when you start, unlocking the layers. For example, I mean, there's stories like Hatak, which is perhaps, I think, translated as humiliation. So when you read it, it's set in a way that it's almost like, oh, it's such a transactional relationship with these two men. And so this woman who could literally be doing any kind of business or work, and then it's a financial issue that she has until she has this emotional dilemma about her profession. So I would say he makes sure that you are not an alien in the story, that he does not want you to be the other. And that is why I feel people get a little uncomfortable, because you're almost there in that world and you're relating to those characters. Because I was thoroughly like mesmerized by his work. And then later on, too, he has just stayed with me. I've literally like grown up reading him over and over again. And there's so much of his work to explore, even in terms of quantity, that I also feel that there are stories which are not that famous, where he talks about very mundane issues and boring characters, but then he puts them in situations which are interesting, but yet not entirely unbelievable. For me, I think Manto is cozy. Manto is too familiar. And maybe the Lahoriness or the Punjabiness, so to say, which is very evident in his expression, that I connect a lot with. He also is very accessible in terms of the language he uses. Like, he does not bombard vocabulary on you. He's very effortless. Like, if he's struggling with like a word, he would not shy away from dropping in a Punjabi word or a Hindi word or an English word at that. So I do feel that the margins and everything that comes later as a realization, when I think one has a fair sense of his themes, which are, running across most of his work. And his fascination with a certain section of the society is visibly there.
He also faced backlash, right? Like, he had a tough time. I mean, society did not treat him very well.
Yeah, I mean, there were people who were writing all sorts of stuff, but I think for him, I would also say that he was a very selfish writer. He just believed in his characters and storytelling, and there is a fair amount of arrogance in his work too. When you're dealing with somebody like that, of course, he can't just tilt towards an ideology. So I would say that he got into trouble mostly because he would not adhere to any politics. Even within the literature world, there were things like the progressive writers movement, the socialists and the Marxists. So he would have fun with the themes. He would talk about a lot of that, but he would never call himself as a subscriber of any of these structured politics or schools. And arrogant to the point that, he would say that, "Main manto pasand hu." I have my own school, I have my own style.
So I'd like to talk to you about many of your films, but of course, unfortunately, we don't have time. And you've done a biopic on Manto. You did a film called Kamli. But let's talk about Zindagi Tamasha, the circus of life. And it was Pakistan's submission for the 93rd Oscars in 2020, but it's never been seen in theaters in Pakistan, which is heartbreaking. It's been described as a film about how a non-minority becomes a minority, which I thought was a really great description. In the film, the main character's name is Rahat Khwaja, and he attends a wedding. So afterwards, he's gupshupping with his brother and his friends, and they're just relaxing. And his brother mentions that when he was younger, when Rahat was younger, that he got in a lot of trouble with his father because he liked dancing effeminately and kind of playing out bits of Bollywood or Lollywood movies. And so these men sitting around, they're of course like, well, do some dancing for us. And so Rahat gets up and he performs this very beautiful, elegant dance. And you get caught up in seeing how he enjoys dancing, how much he's enjoying this particular dance. And unfortunately, somebody videotapes it, it gets leaked on YouTube, and then, the rest is a tale of how he gets ostracized.
So one element or one key thing that I'd like to add to the Pressy would be that he is a seemingly religious, conformist, bearded man. And having a beard and being in your late middle age does have a very standard association culturally in Pakistan.
So, where did you get the idea for this film?
So it was very ironically an idea lifted from YouTube. And eventually we had to release the film on YouTube too. So I was preparing for a theater play. I was adapting a play called Butterflies Are Free. And we were doing like a complete adaptation and bending a lot of themes in it. And I was looking for just videos of men dancing, Pakistani men dancing. And I came across a video where, I saw a bearded man, not as old as Rahat, a youngish person, and dancing with this joy and abandon, and dancing to a very popular song by Madame Noor Jahan. She's perhaps the legend of the subcontinent when it comes to singing. While I was watching that video, you know how the next video starts queuing up and it shows in a little window? I saw the same man and then I think his hands were clasped or something. So I just let that video play. And he was apologizing for that dance in a very sort of dramatic, scripted way. And then there were a bunch of videos and, people had, of course, done different edits of those. There was a video where, his dance was in a split screen and then he was apologizing for that dance. And only because he had a beard and he said that, yeah, I'm a very religious person and I shouldn't have done that. So I just watched it and it somehow seemed too sad as even like, say, some random content that I came across, and it stayed with me. And literally that became the seed, the idea. And now if you look at Zindagi Tamasha, if it were to have, say, centerpieces, so the two centerpieces in the two sort of splits of the film. So one is what he does. And then as you move toward the end of the second act, it is when he apologizes for the dance. And then whatever it leads to. Yeah, so it just came from this amazing cyber world of free floating content that we are stimulated by and we are just engulfed by every day.
Men in South Asia are held up to certain standards of masculinity. So in Zindagi Tamasha, a bearded, pious man who is in all respects a caring father and husband is ostracized, not only by the men in his community, but also by his own daughter, for dancing in a manner considered effeminate, for enjoying dance. I won't go into the stats about men and suicide in South Asia, but I'll say that there are many studies that make a connection between male suicide and social norms of male stoicism, strength, and financial success. When men fail to live up to this stereotype, then their mental health suffers because, asking for help, expressing fear of failure, is also considered to be unmanly. And I read it took you about a year and a half to develop the characters. And I wanted to ask you, what is it about an older man dancing in this way that you think was seen as so controversial in Pakistan?
First of all, so I just had this basic idea and some sense of characters. But Nirmal Bano, this brilliant screenwriter, she wrote it, she developed the whole thing, and then we jointly sort of wrote bits of it. And then when it came to dialogue, that's when, I contributed more. You see, what you said, how a non-minority is made into a minority is where, the whole play was. That, I'll quote Manto Saab, where he says, just growing a beard makes you look religious in Pakistan, right? Or in a Muslim setting, you're just considered to be respectable. He says that I wish women could also just grow beards to show their chastity and, their redemption. So, how beard has that association, and to top it, we also have this interesting side to him that he is a reciter of naats, right, which are praise poems written for the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So that in itself is considered like, say, the holiest of, if one can loosely call it, a performing art, right? Because it is almost like singing, but then, you can't call it singing. That's also not considered correct. In any case, so he's a part-time Naat Khwa, and then he has a beard, and he lives in a small mohalla. So, of course, him dancing is a problem, Him dancing is considered unholy.
And what about the ending?
So, if you look at the film, when we started with the basic plotting, I was going in wild directions of, turning it into a big climax where, a lot of destruction has happened, and then some big third act happens, and, somebody rescues the moment. But as it just grew organically, draft after draft, Zindagi Tamasha is a very unusual screenplay because it does not grow like an act wise screenplay. The big drama never happens. We also just show that that sense of shame is not even his to begin with, it is being projected by his daughter, which brings me to say the ideas of misogyny and patriarchy being not just restricted to men. It is how men, because they have controlled the narrative, the culture to a point that, sometimes it is being projected and executed through women. And it's a mindset as opposed to like just a construct restricted to a gender. It is a big problem, but the problem you are never made aware of, literally. A neighbor has a problem and it fizzles out. The police person has a problem, it goes away. Somebody threatens him almost to the point of accusing him of blasphemy, but he never accuses him of blasphemy. So that tone of the film, that sometimes it is the macro view which makes it so dismal, and it is bizarre at best, but not always dangerous. But then you start feeling that ostracization, you start feeling it. Life also does not always follow a cause and effect rule. And so an odd series of incidents can happen, but they could just, look like that they are funneling into some big moment of glory or disaster. So that ways, the catastrophe is very internal, and it does not really have like that external point of view. I would say Zindagi Tamasha is more like a mood piece, as we would like to call it.
So tell me about the backlash that you got. I mean, I read somewhere that you expected it to be a controversial film, but did you expect the backlash that you ended up getting?
Yes, I was aware of the fact that, I was dealing with themes that could seemingly look controversial, or themes that people are not too comfortable, exploring. But having said that, I thought I was being smart. I was almost telling a very empathetic story, or at least like an empathy stimulating story where, it would look like we are talking about the bearded guys, we're talking about the religious people, and we are showing like another human layer to them. This is not about Maulvi hating or Mullah bashing. That is not the tone of the film. I think we got wrong with the trailer. Because as mellow, and by mellow, I don't mean melodramatic, but as say subtle or restrained, the style of storytelling in Zindagi Tamasha is, the trailer was too sensational. There's stillness to Zindagi Tamasha. Actually, in most of the scene, nothing happens. It's just that moment that goes on, and it's about the tedium of the moment that, we were trying to explore. And when it came to the trailer, I thought we need to make it catchy, or at least interesting. So the trailer looked like a big punch because we had, say, the blasphemy accusation line. We had the line when they have the fight and he says something about the clerics. I think it was just a lot of lines. So that trailer perhaps triggered people a bit too much. People who loved it, and people who wanted to just pick bits out of it and make their own narratives from it, and then piggyback on it and tally their own political milestones with it. I think I did set a very delicious plate for people who were looking for that kind of a bowl full of excitement for them, and they lapped it up.
And as I understand it, the censor boards actually approved the film.
Many times.
And at the province level, there were some provinces that were not permitting the film, and therefore it never got seen.
Just my dear Punjab, my own dear Punjab had the biggest problem with it. And even to date, I still have the certificate issued by Punjab Censor Board. So there are three censor boards in Pakistan, which is in itself strange. We are a tiny little country. One could do with one censor board. The entire US can do with one. I mean, India can do with just one censor board. But in any case, so Punjab has a separate one, then federal and KP has another, and then Sindh and Balochistan have another, and they do not, of course, work in collaboration or like in any kind of good communication. So all three cleared it initially, but when TLP had a problem with it, and when the TLP, is a far right political party, and they call themselves a religious political party, which I find very ironic. How can a political party be religious too? So they had the big problem, and their sort of, main spokesperson back then, he was known for being this firebrand speaker. So he had a lot of hate and things based on the trailer alone, and said dramatic things like that it would only release over his dead body. And then he called for strikes all across the province and like a big strike on the big mall road of Lahore, etc. They put my posters in mosques and things like that. That whole drama, I still know for a fact that, if one were to just put it parallel to whatever was happening to the party at that point, it's hardly a mystery, to be honest. They had their own thing going on, and their name was banned from newsrooms, etc. TLP, the name could not be taken. They were always called the banned party or something. So, but because of the film, they came back into limelight. And I definitely feel that they piggybacked on the film. So in any case, TLP had a problem and they started sending complaints to the Information Ministry, which is certainly the parent sort of organization under which the censor board is a small part of. And that's when they started calling the film for reviews. I mean, technically, if you've issued the certificate, stamped it, and it's valid for 25 years or something, they can't technically take it back. Like, I can take the censor board to court, which I didn't, and I should have perhaps. And hence, to date, we do not have an official banning document. The film wasn't banned. It was always these, bullying and harassment and, which was online and physical also. There were really ridiculous type court cases against us by smaller religious organizations. That was the saga.
Right. And it was a saga. And it feels a little bit like it was art imitating life, imitating art. It's got lots of twists to it. So then in August 2023, last year, you released it on YouTube. And as I understand, you did that because you started to see sort of pirated copies of it coming out. And you released it with a short speech, which I found very moving and illuminating, because you talked about how you were releasing it in August. It's the month of independence for Pakistan, and that you were also setting your film free out into the world.
It does sound too dramatic, but yeah.
But I don't blame you. Dude, I mean, you'd been through so much, really. It was actually such a brave act, I felt, that you did that. And I also found it really interesting that you put up bank account details and you said, if anybody wants to pay for it as if it was a ticket, please do. And then what happened?
Another little sort of, side to the story is that we did try to put it on Amazon and Netflix, and you have to pitch it via aggregators. But, that in itself is a very tedious route. They're pretty mainstream. They just do a bunch of, say the art housey or whatever, as they call it, the festival circuit films or the indie films. So we did not make it to any of these platforms. So that didn't happen. That is why we put it on Vimeo for a fundraiser. And by the way, that is how we qualified for our Oscar submission too. We had put it on Vimeo for a limited time because for that particular year, the Academy had relaxed its rules. Otherwise, for any international feature, you have to have released in the country of origin for at least a week. So fast forward to the August of last year, a pirated copy started showing up, and literally I got a WhatsApp, like a mass forwarded whatever thing, which said, "Oh, Zindagi Tamasha's link is available for 300 Pakistani rupees, and if you want the link, please let me know or subscribe to this channel." Da, 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 da. So it broke my heart. It made me super angry, and I was furious. I didn't know what to do. Then this other fear that I started feeling was that, now if it's available, now people can actually take out any little clip and use it out of context. I mean, I'd done a rather ridiculously brave scene in the series called Chorels. That clip was used out of context when Joyland released, and the whole thing about, oh, how Joyland is promoting, as they call it, the LGBTQ agenda in Pakistan. So I was like, now I can't risk that. Now, how about I put the film out there?
But it was the comments, actually, which I thought were so incredible. Like read so many of them, and they were moving. They were really, really moving. And I wondered for you, I mean, here you are, you were not able to have that theatrical release, but in its place, you got to hear directly from people who were talking about the intolerance, who were talking about the norms. They were addressing these things, and you'd started a conversation, like literally started this conversation. What was that like for you? Was it some kind of a redemption in some way?
Truly, truly. I would say it was like how your faith, whatever faith one has, is restored. And the audience having that real power to just own it and take it over from there and, just do whatever they want to do with it. You mentioned the bank account details that we had put. Literally, just from YouTube alone, I mean, and it's not the money that we made off YouTube, because that is not too much, because, for that you need like millions of views. We are just a little over a million. But voluntarily bought tickets were close to about 15, 16,000 US dollars.
Amazing.
I mean, that kind of money, honestly, what I came to know about, that's not even the kind of money that Netflix was giving for Pakistani content to be put on Netflix. And this is people like, who are buying tickets, sending in like 1,000 rupees or like 5,000 rupees, or like just a bunch of people gathering in some kind of a co-working space and putting the film on a projector and putting a little box there, and everybody's putting in ticket money. And then they would send me a receipt like on social media. And honestly, like, I would not want to sound immodest and boastful, but that's when I actually felt that this wasn't just a film. I thought, oh, in some way, it is a weird transformative experience for me and for the audience also. Like, I had not seen this kind of a response. I did not know this kind of power and this sense of ownership when it comes to an audience. And yes, I mean, I was very scared initially because, of course, the haters were there and they were just putting in there like whatever little hashtags, cuss words. I was not ready for that, because that's also what I learned, that no, I'm not going to volunteer for anything coming my way, be it online also. I need to keep myself safe from it. So I will delete and block things that I need to. So after that, I was like, comments off, because YouTube very oddly has like a very different audience, which goes and comments. YouTube has a more mass audience to it, particularly the commenters. Now, after a few days, I started getting like these DMs and, comments on our other social media handles that, this is unfair. Like, we want to talk about the film and you're losing on this whole discourse that could actually develop. And, people want to comment on it. And very sheepishly and reluctantly, I was like, okay, switch it on for a day and let's see. And really, that was an explosion. We had a small team and I told them to, do whatever, like homemade analytics. And they were like 99% good. People are loving it. They're owning it. It was mind blowing, just to say the least.
So, Sarmad, I want to thank you so much for, of course, joining me today. But I'm also so grateful that you put so much on the line just so we get a chance to talk about things like intolerance and what it does to people, men and women. Anyone can become marginalized. So I want to thank you for that.
Thank you, Shana. It's such a pleasure to be here, and it was lovely talking to you. I'm
You
really
too.
happy that I became a part of and the first man to be on her Kajal Won't Smudge.
Love it. Thank you. In our conversation, Sarmad corrected me in the nicest possible way when he said that Manto doesn't look at the margins or the marginalized, because Manto draws you into his characters. So you forget that they're marginalized and you just see them as human, relatable, not the other. And now I get it. There is a distinction, right? And maybe that's the essence of Zindagi Tamasha. That a Daribala, a bearded, religious man, is more than a male stereotype. We get to empathize with him, relate to him, to his optimism, his bravery, and his textures. For a long minute, it did feel like Zindagi Tamasha, this film that looks at intolerance, was itself going to lose out to real-life intolerance. But then, the audience started chiming in, sharing their views on stereotypes, and that was it. Sarmad's started a real conversation on men and social norms, one that all of us can join. Thanks for listening to Her Kajal Won't Smudge. I'm your host, Shana. If you want to get in touch with us and rage or have a good cry or just tell us what you're thinking, look for our webpage, because we have one now, or find us on Instagram. Until next week.